You're 16 years old. Your wedding day. The most important day of your life, they told you. Right now, 700 guests are celebrating upstairs. The wine flows. Musicians play. Your father beams with pride at the alliance he's secured. Your new husband waits in the marriage chamber, nervous but excited. But you're not there. You're underground, in a stone room beneath the temple. The door just locked behind you, from the outside. And standing in front of you, blocking the only exit, is a man in priest's robes. He's not your husband, he's not your father, he's not anyone you've ever met. But according to Roman law, according to tradition, according to the gods themselves, he has the right to touch you first, before your husband, before your wedding night, before you even become a wife. This isn't speculation. This isn't myth whispered in shadows. This is documented Roman practice, written into law, carved into temple walls, buried so deep that scholars spent 2,000 years pretending it didn't exist, until 2003, when archaeologists found the room. And the names? Hundreds of names scratched into stone by the women who couldn't scream. Want to know what civilization really looked like? Want to know what tradition actually meant? Let me show you the wedding ritual Rome tried to erase from history. And I promise you this, after today, you'll never look at ancient Rome the same way again. You'll never hear the word tradition without asking the question Rome never wanted you to ask. Who benefits from this? And who pays the price? But before we go into that room, before I show you what happened in the darkness, you need to understand how they built the cage. Roman marriage wasn't love. It was a legal transaction called manus, ownership transfer. Your father owned you, then your husband owned you. Simple, except there was a clause that appeared in Rome's foundational legal text, the 12 Tables. A clause that said before ownership could transfer, before you could become a wife, you had to be purified. That was the word they used, purificatus, purified. And who performed this purification? The priests of Bona Dea, a fertility cult embedded in the heart of Roman religious power, state-sanctioned, government-funded, untouchable. The law was explicit. No bride of a proper Roman household shall enter marriage without purification by the appointed guardians of divine will. Read that again. Appointed guardians of divine will. That's legal language for priests have the right to your body before your husband does. Here's what makes this particularly sick. Roman religion was transactional. You gave offerings to the gods gave you blessings, simple exchange, wine for good harvest, slaughtered animals for military victory. But in marriage, the offering wasn't wine, wasn't grain, wasn't gold. The offering was you. Think about what that means for a second. You're 16 years old. Your entire life has been preparation for this day. You know your duty. You know your place. You've been taught obedience since you could walk. But nobody, absolutely nobody, told you about this part. Nobody explained that before you belong to your husband, you belong to the gods. And the gods, they demand proof, physical proof. Proof that would be taken in a room no sunlight ever reached. Can you imagine the terror of walking toward that door, knowing what's waiting, knowing you have no choice? Now let me show you where they took that proof. In 2003, archaeologists excavating beneath the Temple of Bona Dea on Rome's Aventine Hill found something that made them stop digging for 3 days. A chamber, underground, stone bed in the center, channels carved into the floor for liquid runoff, locking mechanism on the door, designed to lock from the outside. This wasn't a storage room. This wasn't a crypt. This was built for one purpose. And on the walls, names, hundreds of names, all female, each with a date. British archaeologist Catherine Johns spent 3 years documenting them. 3 years staring at those walls. Her official report concluded, quote, These appear to be records of women who underwent some form of ritual in this space. The nature of the ritual is not explicitly stated. That's academic language for we know exactly what happened here, but we're too scared to say it plainly. So let me say it plainly. This is where priests violated brides before their wedding nights, and the law called it sacred. Here's how it worked. After the ceremony, after the public celebration, after your father kissed your forehead and your husband toasted your future, older women came for you. Women who'd survived this themselves. They didn't explain. They just led you away. Down the temple stairs, into the dark. Your husband wasn't allowed to follow. That was law. Explicit law. You reached a heavy door. It opened. Inside, one priest. Sometimes more. The fragmented sources don't agree on numbers, but they agree on what happened next. The Roman playwright Plautus, writing in 205 BCE, included a scene in one of his comedies. It was later censored, violently censored, but fragments survived. One character says, "The gods receive their share before any man. That is the law." Another character asks, "And the bride? What does she receive?" The answer? The blessing of purification. If she survives it, read that again. If she survives it. That line was forcibly removed from later versions. Someone in power decided Romans shouldn't read it, shouldn't think about it, shouldn't question why a wedding ritual came with a survival condition. But here's the truly genius part of this system, the part that kept it running for centuries. The silence protocol. You survived the chamber, you emerged. Hours later, maybe a full day later, trauma carved into your body, terror carved into your mind. And now came the second violation, the legal one. You were forbidden by law from speaking about what happened. The Lex Fania, passed in 169 BCE, stated clearly, "Women who reveal the mysteries of sacred rites shall be charged with impiety. Punishment, exile, or death." So you couldn't scream, couldn't tell your husband, couldn't warn your younger sisters, couldn't write it down, couldn't even cry about it without risking execution. The system had perfect insulation. The victims were legally silenced. The perpetrators were legally protected, and the only people who wrote history were the men who built the system. But here's what they never understood about silencing victims. Silence isn't the same as forgetting, and sometimes people find ways to speak without words. In the 1920s, archaeologists in Pompeii found a room that had been sealed before the eruption, deliberately walled off. Inside, a fresco, a wedding scene, standard Roman imagery, except for one detail that made the lead archaeologist's hands shake when he saw it. In the background, barely visible, a woman being led downward by robed figures, her face turned back, her hand reaching toward a man who wasn't following, and her face, rendered with more detail, more care, more skill than the central bride and groom. Someone spent hours on that face. Someone desperately wanted it remembered. The archaeologist wrote in his notes, "Whoever painted this knew they couldn't speak, so they hid the truth in plain sight and hoped someone would see. 2,000 years later, we saw it." That's not acceptance. That's testimony. That's a survivor who understood the system would try to erase what happened but refused to let it succeed. But the fresco wasn't the only message they left behind. After the ceremony, you returned to your husband, still wearing your veil, the flamium, a thick veil that covered your entire face. Roman wedding tradition demanded the husband consummate the marriage with his bride still veiled. For centuries, historians called this modesty. Roman virtue, proper conduct. Then feminist historian Amy Richland found something in the medical texts. The Roman physician Soranus, writing in the 2nd century CE, noted that brides often showed signs of recent injury on their wedding night. Then he wrote something that should make your blood run cold. The veil serves a double purpose. It preserves modesty and it prevents the husband from observing evidence of the purification ritual, which might provoke improper questions. Read that again.